Welcome back to educator.com. Today we're going to go over the 2013 AP Free Response Question exam. So let's go right over the exam here. So the AP Free Response exam here. So question number 1 is going to deal with approaches to representation within a democratic political system. So this is what you went over in the beginning part of your AP course, more than likely. So these are democratic approaches. And again, there are really two ways to deal with it: direct democracy and representative democracy. And we know the United States, we have representative democracy, and direct democracy would be very impractical with over 300 million people all participating in legislation. So defining direct democracy is actually fairly simple. Rule by people. So say that direct democracy is ruled by people, but you have to have one of two other items here. So you can say that direct democracy is ruled by people in addition to individually participating in legislation. So basically, individually, you're taking part of making laws, which again would be very impractical in the United States. Or you make decisions without delegating authority to elected reps. So basically the idea that you don't give authority to individuals that are elected. So that would be a form of direct democracy. I would say the first part would probably be the more conventional answer, direct democracy being directly ruling and making laws and participating in making laws here. So that's one point right there. Now the second point, the second point here is going to deal with defining a Republican form of government. So you have a direct democracy, and what is a Republican form of government? And that's basically what we have here in the United States and most democracies. So in today's vernacular, when we refer to democracies, we're actually referring to more of a Republican form of government. And this is where authority is delegated to elected officials. And so you can just talk about how, again, for practical considerations, this is the way that most democracies are run, through a Republican form of government. You elect officials to represent your interests, or supposedly they're there to represent your interests. And that's basically how most countries, including the United States, operate. So that's the second point here. Now, specific to Part C is talking about the founders of the Constitution. What is one reason the founders chose a Republican form of government over direct democracy? And again, even if you didn't necessarily study this, they're only asking you for one reason. So this should be extremely easy to come across here. This does not require intense analysis. It's actually fairly common sense here. So could be mob rule. So they feared mob rule, and along with that, the size of the country. And if you want to be a little bit more pessimistic, then you can argue that they were an elite group and they only wanted those with property interest to be taking part in representing the government. And again, simply another way of saying it is that trust or lack thereof. They didn't trust the masses. Or you can talk about to quell factions. So again, a Republican form of government is better suited to quell factions than is a direct democracy. And again, you can argue that there's already existence of states. So states already already had this form of government. So, why reinvent the wheel? Just continue with what the states were having. And again, to try to reinforce federalism. Again, because you only have to choose one reason, there's really no reason why you should miss this point here. But the most common answer would probably be, fear of mob rule, not trusting the people, elitism, and also size of country. So again, this is just one point here. And so just by kind of running through common sense, you should be able to come up with this particular answer here. Now, part D actually gets to the heart of what it actually means to be a member of Congress. So if someone is elected to Congress, there's really two basic ways that you can view your role. And one is the trustee approach. And the second one is the delegate approach. And the reality is that most congressmen won't simply choose one role. They'll go ahead and look at both ways of doing this. But the trustee model is taking a personal or a conscience view. So you're going to vote for something because you think it's right or wrong. So let's say you are pro-life. So you think abortion is wrong no matter what the circumstances, but you live in an area where there's more of a liberal influence, ideology is a little bit more liberal, yet you still vote pro-life. You are voting your conscience here. So this is the idea that you're there, you're elected to represent what is right or what you think is right. Again, this is based on the role of Congress as not representing people, but the idea is that as an elected representative, you have a bigger responsibility than simply mirror what your constituents are saying here. And as opposed to that, opposite to that is the delegate approach. Okay, the delegate approach, basically you mirror views of constituents. Okay, you are basically a servant of the people, and so you represent people that voted you in. So your goal is to basically vote for laws that are going to benefit your people, whether or not you agree with it or not. So mirror views of constituents, serving the people, whether you personally agree or not. I think a good definition that I actually, a personal story, the school that I teach at, Grace Napolitano, actually before the district was actually reapportioned, was actually represented by Democrat from California, Grace Napolitano. And I actually invited her. She graciously accepted to speak to my students and also students at the school. And she explained that she was a member of the House of Representatives. And so the goal exactly of House of Representatives is to actually represent the interests of the constituents. So I would say that the delegate approach is more conducive to be followed in the House, partly because they serve 2 years, whereas the Senate is more conducive to the trustee approach because they're only required to be reelected every 6 years. So there's less of an incentive for a senator to follow a delegate approach than does a House member who has to face the prospects of reelection every 2 years. So that would be the 2 points that are listed for question number 1D. And part E is explaining why a member might sometimes act as a trustee rather than the delegate. And I actually, one reason you can actually use, and this was actually not part of the official rubric, but to me, it actually makes sense. The Senate over House in terms of frequency over frequency of elections. So the less frequently you are subject to re-election, the less incentive you have to act as a trustee. So the more frequently you are elected or subject to re-election, the more frequently you are subject to re-election, then the more incentive you have to act as a delegate here. But since this is asking why you might want to act as a trustee, again, being in the Senate could be more of incentive than whether in your house. But one reason might be simply you have more access to information, so the public might want you to vote a certain way, but you know certain things that are sensitive information, so you might kind of overrule what your constituents say. Or it could be that you have more access to expertise, or you have more expertise on the issue. And so you feel that if the public was informed, then they would agree with you. And you can argue that there's a divided constituency. So, what would you do if your constituency is 50% leaning one way and 50% leaning the other way? Then it could be the case that you have a divided constituency, so rather than trying to be a delegate, you actually act as a trustee. And it could be the salience of votes. So again, even though your constituents might seem to be in favor of one way of voting, because it's such an important issue, you might say, you know what, I'm going to vote my conscience, even though just simply because it's the right thing to do. And kind of a common sense thing. How do you know? So again, if it were the case that you were to know that there was a divided constituency, but you don't have access to polling data, maybe you simply don't know. So you might argue that at a town hall meeting, someone might be opposed to the bill, but it could be the case that people that are in favor of the bill simply don't speak out on the issue. So maybe there's a silent majority that you're unaware of. So you can take that argument and say, you know what, you don't know what the constituents want, so you're going to act as a trustee. Okay, so any one of these reasons might give you that 1 point. So number 1 will give you a total of 6 points. Okay, question number 2. Number 2 deals with political parties here. So number 2 deals with political parties. So over the past several decades, the influence of political parties have declined while the strength of Congress has increased. So what are 2 functions of political parties here? So what do political parties actually do? So they provide cues to voters. There are just some very partisan voters that will simply vote based on political parties. So they give cues to voters. Okay, this person's Republican, I'm going to vote for this Republican. This person's Democrat, I'm going to vote for Democrat. Okay, not only that, they provide a platform for issues. So it's the role of a political party to bring up issues that matter to the candidates. So it's a political party that will emphasize certain issues, and they're the ones that provide the platform for the issues to be debated. And not only that, they recruit candidates. So they're the ones that find the rising stars within a political party, and they're the ones that also nominate officially the candidates for office. And kind of along those lines, they're the ones that provide support. Support in terms of volunteers and also money. I mean, if you're running for office, then you're going to appreciate not only moral support from your political party, but you're going to want some monetary contributions to fund your campaign. And again, on election day and the months leading up to election, you mobilize voters. You get out the vote. Okay. So these are functions of political parties. Now, part B is going to talk about what is the role political parties play within Congress to promote the party's political party. So not the function of political parties from the perspective of voters, but what is the function of political parties within Congress to enact a public policy agenda? Well, it's the idea that the leadership positions, they're the ones that have power in Congress. Okay, so as such, they're the ones that articulate policy preferences, and they're the ones that promote issues. So within Congress, it's the leadership that really determines, what issues are seen as being important. And not only that, the majority party, they're the ones that selects the committee chairs. And again, committee chairs, they wield a lot of power. And again, it's the committee chairs. If the majority party is Republican, then you're going to have Republican chairs for pretty much all the committees. And again, the majority party, led by the Speaker of the House, majority party, they control debates. And kind of along that same line of reasoning, it's the majority party that sets the rules and sets the calendar for the House. So again, they act as the traffic cop. So the House Rules Committee is chaired by a Republican if there's a Republican majority. It's chaired by a Democrat if there's a Democrat majority. So there's extreme amount of power that's given to political parties within Congress to promote agenda. And so they're going to choose issues that are favorable to them. Okay, so that's going to give you just that 1 point. So part A will give you 2 points here, and part B will just give you that 1 point. So you only need one of these answers to get that 1 point. Okay, so part C deals with explaining how each of the following factors has weakened the influence of political parties. So political parties actually serve to be something of a more dominant influence in the 19th century. But in the 20th century, with the rise of the media, candidates have been able to kind of bypass political parties. So they can provide help and support, but it's the idea that certain things have caused there to be less influence. And one reason is direct primaries. So direct primaries means that the party has less control over nominations. And that's a huge thing. So with direct primaries, it's the people within the political party that determine whether or not you can get the nomination. So it's not through backroom dealing that you get the nomination. So direct primaries enables candidates to get direct appeal. So you don't have to worry about controlling nominations. So there's simply just direct appeal. Okay, and not only that, direct appeal, use of media to connect with audience or connect with voters. So political parties, they're not as essential as they used to be, because it used to be the case that the party leaders were the ones choosing the candidates, but with the pretty much implementation of direct primaries across all 50 states or through caucuses, it's really the individual responsibility of a candidate to get appeal directly to voters. So they use media, they use social media nowadays to gain popularity. Okay, and as far as candidate-centered campaigns, again, the same idea, candidate-centered campaigns focuses not on the issues necessarily or the parties, but again, you get, again, this very similar type of answer as the idea of direct parties, but direct appeal to voters. Yeah, and you could just raise your own money. Okay, you're not necessarily beholden to the political parties, relying on their money. And again, you can set your own issues. So again, these candidate-centered campaigns, people are voting for individuals now, and so you can kind of choose which issues you're going to emphasize. So that really has weakened the role of political parties, where individuals can really set the agenda. And finally, question or part D here. So this will yield 2 points here. And the final one here. So this is part D. Explain how party polarization has actually strengthened party influence within Congress. So there's kind of the simultaneous idea that party influence, again, depending on in the context in which you're looking at party influence, within Congress it's strengthened, but the party influence in terms of voters, they don't have as much influence there. Now, party polarization has increased party influence, okay, being because members vote party lines. They rarely cross over. So when you have very partisan Republicans and partisan Democrats, the influence of parties actually is increased within Congress because there's less incentive for members of your party to cross over to the other side. So there's an incentive to be a good Republican and vote with the conservatives, or be a good Democrat and vote with the liberals. So that serves to increase party polarization. Okay, question number 3. Question number 3 is going to be the graph question. So interpret the graph. Usually one of the 4 questions is going to be able to interpret the data on the graph. Now, I personally think this is a question that you definitely don't want to miss, because if you're just simply able to interpret the data, it's not going to be something that's wildly difficult. It's just being able to identify trends on a chart here. So number 3, presidents are considering a lot of factors when nominating candidates to the federal courts, and getting a nominee confirmed can be kind of a difficult process. So using the chart above, what's one similarity between President Obama's judicial appointments and President Bush's? All right, well, you can argue that that what you have here, again, let's try to list all the data here, and before we answer maybe A, B, C, and D, just identify some trends and kind of mark the answer that way. So you have Obama, and then you have Bush. In terms of African American, Obama has had 22%. And again, this is as of 2011. Okay, Obama appointed 22% African Americans to the judiciary, and George Bush 7%. And in terms of Hispanic, Obama appointed 11% to Bush's 9%. Asian American, you had 8% Obama and 1% Bush. You have whites, 59% Obama, 82% Bush. Women, 46% Obama and 23% Bush. And finally, men, 54% Obama and 78% men for George W. Bush. So what's one similarity? Okay, there are probably a couple of different ways that you can go about this, but I would say the most common one was both majority of appointments were white, and the majority of appointments were men. Okay, so the majority are white and majority were men. So I think that would be kind of a similarity. And another similarity that you could have used is similar, plus or minus 2% in terms of Hispanic appointments. This one's kind of you can argue that, instead of majority appointments were whites or majority appointments were men, you could argue that a minority, they didn't have as many minority appointments as majority. So there's different ways and variations of saying basically the same thing. But again, pretty straightforward, and you just get that 1 point. Okay, the second point actually deals with what are two differences between Obama and Bush in terms of the characteristics, right? So you can argue here, okay, well, whereas it was a majority, you're basically saying the same thing in A as you are in B, but you're emphasizing different things. So you can say Obama appointed more minorities. So he appointed, you can argue, he appointed 33, 41% minorities to Bush's minority appointment was only 17%. So that's one difference. And you can say Obama appointed percentage-wise more women than Bush. And again, there are different variations. You can say, Obama 22% African American appointments to Bush's 7% African American. Or you can say Obama 8% of Asian Americans to Bush's only 1% of Asian Americans. Yeah. So there's different ways that you can kind of, look at the data and basically see the trend that minority and female appointments were definitely more common with Obama than with George W. Bush. Okay, Part C. Part C deals with why does a president party affiliation account for differences in presidential appointments to the judiciary? So basically, why is political party important? And again, that's very simple, I think, because party ID is a proxy for political ideology. Okay, so if you are a conservative, if you're a Republican, and you're going to want to appoint another Republican because, Republicans, not all the time, but they have very similar views on economic policy, foreign policy. So you're going to want to put someone on the court that shares somewhat similar views. And again, political party, it's not the best proxy, but it's a fairly accurate indicator of how you're going to vote in future cases based on that view of political party. Another reason why is electoral coalition backing. So let's say you're a moderate Republican. So you're a moderate Republican. So let's assume that Mitt Romney ran and became president in 2012 rather than Barack Obama. I think it's fairly safe to say that Mitt Romney was a fairly moderate Republican. He's not considered to be the most conservative Republicans. Well, he might choose an individual that's conservative, even though he might have more moderate tendencies, again, to appease the Tea Party wing, to appease the faction in party. So again, to try to build support. So sometimes a president can use a judicial appointment to appease members of his own party. And Part D, the final part to question number 3, describe one way the president can increase the chances of having judicial nominees to the federal court confirmed. Well, you can consult Senate first. And so the process of senatorial courtesy. Now again, this only is applicable for lower court nominations, district courts, and not the Court of Appeals or Supreme Court, but that's one way. You can select the moderate. So kind of the opposite of what I said the previous previous part C about how if you're moderate, you select a conservative. Well, if you want to ensure more of a nomination, then you can select a moderate so that members of the opposing party may find your selection more appealing than if you try to nominate someone that is a hardline conservative. For example, Robert Bork was nominated by President Reagan, and Robert Bork, the terminology being borked, was because he was deemed to be too conservative for Democrats' tastes. So that's one way to try to ensure nomination. Choose someone where you're going to get support with your party, but choose someone moderate that might be somewhat appealing for members of the opposing party. Okay, or you could just vet your candidates. So as president, you just have a dedicated staff that does the background research, make sure there's no criminal background that you're unaware of, no sexual harassment allegations, etc. So just simple, you do your simple due diligence to ensure that you get a candidate that will get confirmed to the bench. Okay, question number 4. So this is the final question in the 2013 FRQ free response question, and it deals with the complex public policy system that we have, the formation, enactment, and implementation of public policy and how it relates to different institutions. So what's the importance of the following in terms of formulating a policy agenda? Okay, what is the importance? So explain the importance of the media in terms of policy agenda. Well, the media, they sets the agenda by acting as the gatekeeper. So gatekeeper is basically, they're the ones that determine what's news. So they determine what's news, and so they influence, what becomes public policy. If the media, decries, a certain way that Congress goes about things, then that becomes part of the agenda. Also, they act as the watchdog. So again, by acting as watchdogs, they basically, make sure people behave appropriately, and they abide by the rules. So as a watchdog, you're constantly making sure you kind of act as the referee of sorts. And also media framing. So again, media framing, the way that they are able to control how a particular issue is examined. They play a critical role in terms of policy agenda. And how do elections help formulate public policy? Well, again, winners of elections get to govern and have power. So absolutely, I mean, to me, this should be kind of an obvious thing. Elections definitely serve in the public policy process. And not only that, it raises awareness of relevant issues. So elections serve to, get the winners in charge of public policy. And not only that, elections serve to bring awareness to the critical issues of the day. Part B. Part B deals with what are the roles of the followings in public policy: congressional committees. So again, congressional committees, that's where all the work is basically done in Congress. They don't work, 435 individuals in the House. They work in these separate committees. So again, the congressmen that work in the committees, they're the ones that act as gatekeepers. So just like the media act as gatekeepers in terms of what's relevant, congressional committees, if they think something is important, then they act as gatekeepers to determine importance of public policy. So if they don't think it's important, then Congress, these committees, they can decide not to really deal with the issue. They can, hold hearings. And so they can bring experts on both sides of the issues. They can talk ad nauseum about whether or not this enactment of public policy will benefit public safety or will it hurt it. So they can subpoena witnesses to come and testify in front of congressional committees. So these congressional committees, they have a huge role in the enactment of public policy. And executive orders. So what the heck how do executive orders, how do they, what's the role that executive orders have in the enactment of public policy? Well, this one's pretty straightforward. Presidents use executive orders to simply enact public policy. I mean, can't get any more direct than that. Okay, and they do that, and by doing that, by bypassing Congress. So presidents can use the threat of an executive order if Congress does not pass a particular bill. So executive orders are there to, they have the full force of law from the president, but they can be equally effective in terms of using the threat of an executive order to get Congress to enact a bill to create a law. So a president probably doesn't want to unilaterally try to use an executive order to pass everything, but selectively the president can use executive orders to enact certain measures of public policy. Okay, and Part C. Okay, so this is a total of 6 points, 2 points for A, 2 points for B, and Part C actually deals with bureaucratic discretion. So if you understand what discretion means, then you're more than likely you can get this right here. So Congress authorizes general spending or appropriations. So basically, bureaucrats or bureaucracies, heads of agencies, so bureaucracies have lots of discretionary authority to implement congressional or executive mandates. Now again, Congress has the right to oversee what bureaucracies do, but bureaucratic discretion is crucial in implementing public policy because Congress can allocate X amount of money to an agency, but the agency could have complete freedom in how to use that money. So bureaucratic discretion is a huge part of the enactment of public policy. And then finally also issue networks. Or iron triangles. So basically, the way that issue networks or iron triangle works here, maybe it's good to draw a little triangle right here. So you have interest groups right here on one corner of a triangle here. And the other corner of the triangle is going to be congressional committees. And you have the bureaucratic organization. Again, would it be incorrect if you drew this iron triangle on the AP exam? It wouldn't be incorrect, but obviously you're going to have more than just the drawing here. So in addition to the drawing, you definitely want to give a description of what that basically means. And basically it's just saying that interest groups work with congressional committees to pressure bureaucracies to implement favorable public policy proposals. And again, and it could be the case that legislation is sought after that will favor an individual interest group over the general public. So again, this iron triangle is more of the idea that these interest groups, bureaucracies, and congressional committees, they have a lot of expertise in the area, and sometimes the interests are not necessarily aligned with that of the public, but it's this idea that these cozy relationships that these committees, bureaucracies, and interest groups they have a huge impact in how public policy is formulated. And so it's crucial to know what role they play in enacting public policy. Thank you for watching educator.com.